January 24th, 2021 at 7:04. Quick roll call. Present Katie Dugan.
Present Tim Davis.
Present Jen Boylan.
Present Marissa Manley.
All right, guys. First order of business is approval of the minutes from December 6th. As usual, I am just in time delivery girl with our minutes. If anybody ever feels uncomfortable with that, please holler. I just when they get done.
I looked it over. It looks good for me. I move we accept it.
Okay. Can I get a second?
Second, Marissa, second.
All in favor? Aye, Katie Dugan.
Hi, Tim Davis.
Hi, Jen
I'm
Boylan.
Marissa Manley.
Thanks, guys. So the next order of business, we typically do an annual reorganization of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Marissa, I don't know if you've been on a committee that's done a reorganization before, but it's typical for most committees to once a year discuss who's going to be chair, who's going to be vice chair, if you vote a secretary, and it's just an opportunity to change up the roles and responsibilities a bit. On our committee, we've got 3 members who have 3-year appointments, myself, Jen, and Cassie. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lauren, I think all of our citizen at large terms are up at the same time. Does that sound right to you?
I think it does. I'm trying to double check right now.
That may be awkward next year. We have 3 citizen at large people who are either re-upping or not. And then the rest of the appointments on the committee, the liaison ones from open space, harbor, et cetera, are 1-year appointments that get re-upped in August. So we typically vote a chairman and a vice chairman for January to January. And so I would take nominations for the group for chairman of the Master Plan Implementation Committee.
I nominate Katie Dugan.
Second.
All right.
Third.
I will accept that nomination with a caveat that in 2022, I'd love a little help prepping some of the meeting materials from the committee. We can talk about that as we go through. I feel like I've been a little bit behind the 8 ball supporting the committee, but I accept the chairmanship. So can we have a quick vote on chairman? I, Katie Dugan.
Hi, Tim Davis.
Hi, Jen
I'm
Boylan.
Marissa Manley.
Great. And we need a vice chair. Generally, the vice chair is the person that runs the meeting in case I get COVID or have some other family emergency, mental health day, whatever it is. And Cassie,
Jen.
Cassie was our vice chair last year.
Cassie, what? Yeah. Is she
Have I
here?
been booted?
No, you've not, but you're about to be voted vice chair. Tim has his way.
Oh, wait, what was I last year? Was I
You were
vice?
vice chair last year.
You're right on time.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you remember that, Cassie?
I do. I
I
do.
second that nomination, Cassie.
Thanks, Tim.
Any other people fighting for vice chair? All right, Cassie, are you okay being vice chair?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So just a quick vote, as Cassie is vice chair, I, Katie Dugan.
Hi, Tim Davis.
Hi, Jen Boylan.
I'm Marissa Manley.
Great. So I guess my only caveat is I've been struggling to kind of get materials ready for the meetings, in part because I feel like I've been devoting quite a bit of time to the zoning front. And I know we all have separate committees that we support, and we're busy, but I was hoping that we could do a little bit more of a divide and conquer when it comes to prepping sections of the agenda going forward. And there's the update section, which is going to be primarily what we do tonight, which really doesn't require a lot of preparation in general. And then there are meetings where we're actually trying to move forward actual work product. And the two kind of pieces of work product that we have in the pipeline are the sidewalk and the funding plan associated with that. And then we've been asked to help with the Cohasset Climate Summit in April. And so those are kind of the two things that, as we talk about agenda for maybe February and March, if we could do a little bit of divide and conquer with committee members to help me prep some of the materials for that, that would be awesome. And I thank you guys in advance. So tonight, I could not get Chief Quigley or Chris Senior lined up for January. So I think when we schedule our next February meeting, instead of picking a date in advance, I think the way we should work this, if we're going to have the sidewalk plan and funding from a safety and town perspective on the agenda, maybe we flex the schedule to accommodate when Chris and Chief Quigley can attend on a Monday night. So that's why we're not talking about sidewalks and the sidewalk plan in detail tonight. So in terms of the updates, next on the agenda is just running through a series of updates, and actually quite a bit has happened on a couple different fronts. So it's actually a good time to do this and get it kind of out of the way. The first update is actually the Elm Street corridor project. And last when we met, and Lauren, I'll give kind of an update and you can fill in the gaps that I missed, and Tim, you can fill in where I also missed, because actually Tim, Lauren, and I, in particular, Tim and Lauren have really been knee deep in this. So when we met in November, the last update was that we were holding the final public forum to review the design recommendation from the working group along with Weston and Sampson, get input from the committee, and then the next step was to bring that final design to the select board in December for a discussion about phase 2 funding. And when we had talked in November, we knew that we hadn't gotten the Community One Stop for Growth grant, which was going to be easy way to fund the design work that needed to get done to move us from 25% design completion to 75% design completion, with 75% design completion being the objective, because that's kind of considered shovel ready from a grant funding perspective. So that's where we last left off. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on how you look at it, two things happened. One, there was a very good update to the select board in terms of acceptance of the preliminary design input, but there was some real balking at the estimated end construction cost of the Elm Street corridor. And when Weston and Sampson put together the final report, they included in the final report a very high level and very conservative estimate of what the final project was going to cost. And I'll show you. Actually, do I have the ability to share screen? Yes, I do. So this is the final report. And so I'll go back to the final layout. But this is what caught the select board's attention in one of the final pages of the report. They estimated the final construction costs of the Elm Street corridor and intersection redesign to be $4.5 to $5.5 million. And with that price tag, two of the members of the select board balked at moving into phase 2 design, given that that price tag might preclude other priorities that the town could have in the future. So that happened. And then in addition to that, we've had one member of the community who holds quite a bit of sway as a former select board member, former very active committee member, and happens to still continue to serve on the capital budget committee, step forward with his own individual concerns about the design. And he began to make some inroads again with the select board and other members in the community that the design itself was not as on point as at least he perceived it should be. As a result of all of this happening in December, Chris Senior made the recommendation that the working group and Lauren in the planning department step back and reiterate a little bit before we move into phase 2 to see if we could address issues in that price tag, but also continue to listen to the community. So in addition to the one individual who stepped forward with design concerns, who has taken to email as frequently as last week on this topic, there were also still a butter issues that were out and about, not major ones, but still some concerns for some of the abutters as to how the design of the corridor and the intersection were going to protect, impact their specific property. So the working group was asked to sort of step back and kind of reiterate a little bit. The working group has met once and is going to meet later again this week. Jason has been working with the design and has come up with a slightly different take than what was laid out in the actual final report that has some merits and is now being discussed. In addition to sort of another iteration on the design, there's been a lot of work started around actually doing a bottoms up cost estimate, because unfortunately the $4.5 to $5.5 million construction fee price tag that Weston and Sampson put in the report had a very high level figure of like $1,600 per linear foot, which if you guys remember, like a sidewalk is like $300 per linear foot. So like it's an order of magnitude bigger. And that included sidewalks, it included the paving. But what really killed the price tag was the movement of a whole bunch of drainage related aspects of the street. By narrowing it slightly, you have to move all the stormwater, and that was one of the big price tag aspects. In addition, when Weston and Sampson did the $4.5 million price tag, they also included some other amenities such as brick sidewalks, which amps up the price even above $300 per linear foot for a nice bituminous with a granite curb. So that's kind of where we are. Just to kind of recap the design, this on the page before, at the end of chapter 6 in the final report, they kind of lay out what the design for the corridor was going to be. It was, at least in the phase 1 report, it was going to be a 6-foot sidewalk with a 2-foot shoulder, 2 passing lanes at 12 feet, and then another 8-foot sidewalk. And so one of the big inputs from the forums was that people wanted both sidewalks widened so that you could actually have A, be ADA compliant, but B, have a wider sidewalk so there could be passing of bikes or people walking shoulder to shoulder instead of what you kind of have to do now, which is in tandem. So that was kind of the phase 1 design. And then this was a mock-up of the intersection, which is down by CHI. You can kind of see in the photograph the existing CHI building, and then what's overlaid in kind of the black and white pen drawing is actually where the new CHI buildings are going to be, including the new building across the street. What happened in this intersection redesign was there was the elimination of that rather large triangle and the short stub of Cove Street, and it became a huge triangular park, which lined up with the view corridor that was being afforded by the CHI redesign, along with giving the buildings a little bit of a buffer from Border Street, because as we all know, the buildings move forward on those parcels so that they could accommodate the open space and the harbor walk, the Captain's Walk, which is going to ring the harbor now. So that's the redesign of the intersection as envisioned in phase 1. And I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or comments from folks while I bring up the slightly tweaked new design.
Well, I'm happy to comment.
Yeah, jump in.
About progress that has been made. There are a number of things that have transpired since the citizen voiced his concern to whoever would listen. I've actually met with him and I understand what his concerns are. I think he represents a constituency of one in terms of his specific issues and concerns. And while they're valid, I think we cannot get sidetracked by a constituency of one. I have met as early as today, Mike Sardina, who is also on the working group, and I met with Larry and Shar Hansen, who live right at the intersection of Margin and Elm and Cove. They are about as as interested residents as anybody could get, and they are very supportive of the work that we are doing. They are supportive of what Jason, and I think Katie, you're probably going to put it up there.
Yeah.
The latest iteration that Ralph doesn't like because it changes how he gets from Atlantic Avenue to
Shaw's.
to Border Street. But yeah, if you go down to the intersection, can you?
Yep, I can scroll down.
Down to the intersection. Yeah, right there. They are very supportive of this particular rendition. Now, Ralph objects to if he's coming down from Border Street down Elm Street and wants to go to Margin, he has to go all the way over to that intersection and turn right instead of doing it right in front of the Cohasset Harbor Inn. The other thing he objects to is coming down Atlantic Avenue and having to turn left into that little intersection and have a stop sign. Well, the fact of the matter is only one stop sign has been moved. And the traffic flow really works well for emergency vehicles and for everybody in the neighborhood. There are some details still to be worked out, particularly the houses that are impacted by the one-way area coming from Elm onto
This one right here, Tim.
right in there. So we have to deal with that. But from what I can gather, and they don't speak for all the neighbors, but what I can gather is this design is acceptable and appreciated. And I am meeting with another resident of this community tomorrow, and I will further that conversation and see where we go with it. And my intent is to meet with as many of the residents as I possibly can to get certainly to get an understanding of what they support and what they might not support. But I think really what I think I and other members of the committee want to do is to get a coalition of residents to support whatever plan we propose. And that's what we're trying to do.
Tim, or Katie, just clarify, when it says grass / open space, is it intended to actually be grass, or could it be something like gravel and small shrubs?
Well, at the moment, what we've talked about is having that be a park, number one. Number two, being a focus on the Captain's Well, which is there, and making that a prominent, more prominent historic site. And then what we've talked about, and I don't know quite how this would work, but having grass pavers and part of it, so that if we were having a celebration, say if Memorial Day or Veterans Day or whatever, it could be used as one-time only parking
On-street
without
parking.
destroying the lawn. But it would be primarily a park where people, the sidewalks, as you see, come around it, which makes it a lot easier for people coming down to get to the harbor. They can either go straight down Elm, or they can take a right and come down past on the way to margin or border. But primarily a park. The other thing too that I will mention that we're just really getting into, and we'll cover a little bit, I think, tomorrow night with the climate summit that the Harbor Committee is doing, is this could well be part of the flood water mitigation area. And we're trying to figure out how that might best work. I'm not sure how that's going to go. This is premature even to mention it, but I will say those are the things we're looking at there.
And so the other green space that's along the sidewalk, yeah, right there where your cursor is
Yeah.
that intended to be park space?
No, well, grass.
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 Yeah, grass, and the big triangle or quadrilateral triangle, however you call it. I don't know. Amy, help me. What is that geometry there? The big one is
Five-sided,
okay. A
a little bit
trapezoid.
rough, but
Is it a
five-sided.
trapezoid, or is it a?
No, it's not a trapezoid. It's gotta have vertical sides,
Yeah. Okay.
parallel.
Oh, whatever.
It's a
It's a
shovel.
ballpark.
It's a candy corn.
There's nothing.
Are we talking the candy corn here?
Exactly. That's a
All right,
scientific.
Katie, it's a candy corn.
Kim, how big is that little park gonna be?
This
little
candy
one?
corn?
No, that's a bunion, the big
That's
one.
Yeah, this is like a
Yeah.
thumb.
That's gonna be a good sized park, Amy.
I
mean,
forget
that's
what,
gonna be-
Jason gave me the dimensions.
It's a little,
You could probably figure it out, but it's gonna be big enough so you can have benches there, people can sit there. Remember that on the north side of that, you're gonna be able to look straight out at the harbor. So, I mean, it will be a beautiful place to sit and look at the harbor, and maybe we'll put a little coffee shop in the middle of it, Amy. I don't know.
A cart for coffee.
Yeah, a cart for coffee or a cart for single malt whiskey or whatever. Well,
So, Jason, just as point of reference, this little nub here is 40 feet. So if that's 40 feet, this has got to be at least 100, approaching 120 feet, Amy. in
so
length.
it is substantial.
Yeah,
it's big enough to do something with. I mean, you could have, for Veterans Day or Memorial Day, if you wanted to have a celebration, you could have a tent there or a kiosk there, or have something there to,
or a chunk of the flags.
you could have flags there. You can do all kinds of things with it.
Yeah,
There's a lot of possibilities with it. And the really nice thing about it is that it's accessible. I mean, right now, the green space that's there is really not accessible unless you want to take your life in your hands to get to it.
well, and it's also, it's just this, I didn't realize how big that island is from Elm to Cove, because this is basically where the island is now is basically Cove Street. And it's a lot of pavement. So again, we're not giving anything to CHI. This is the CHI property line right here. But by eliminating Cove Street and making it this small little two-way, basically turning spot, you gain back quite a bit of green space in terms of a usable green space, to your point, Amy, for the town. And one of the concerns that Jean Dippold expressed in passing at the select board was the fact that when we presented the preliminary design, the first round of concepts, there wasn't any discussion of resiliency. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about how we could use this green space as a secondary resource in terms of resiliency. Whether you could create a depression that could collect water in a storm surge, or how they're going to manage it. It's, as Tim said, a little preliminary, but being able to perhaps design in some resiliency features as a result of having that incremental green space instead of pavement could be very important in the long term. So I guess where we're at right now is obviously Tim and Mike Sardina and the working group are really trying to coalesce community support, in particular support from the abutters. There needs to be people that are standing up and supporting this design, in part to offset the squeaky wheel that's asserted itself. And to be honest, you know, everyone's entitled to their opinions, but Mr. Dormitzer has a history of making his opinion the only opinion that counts in town, and it can be very effective in disrupting processes late in the game. And so the track record of his dates back to village redesign from 20 years ago, Cunningham Bridge, and then most recently Town Hall. So the fact that we need to stand up supporters is pretty critical to show that there are people that are supporting this design. So this is the redesigned intersection that Jason and the working group have been looking at. They have been doing some iterations on the corridor, and part of the reason they're doing iterations on the corridor is just to try and come up with scenarios that don't impact the stormwater drainage, which really was the big tripwire that the consultant and the working group didn't know they were stepping on when they did their first iteration of design. And so this corridor doesn't narrow quite as much as the phase one design that I just showed you. It has a 6-foot sidewalk. It has parking currently on both sides. That's the gray bands. And then it has another 6-foot sidewalk. So it actually uses up the existing roadbed. There's another design that the group just produced in the last week that actually, I think, eliminates parking on the north side. Is that right, Lauren?
Yes.
Okay, so it only has parking on one side, which I believe is acceptable also to the abutters. And it would narrow it slightly. And part of the reason for narrowing the Elm Street corridor was traffic calming was part of the consideration, because right now with 50 feet of pavement with parking and 2 lanes, it really allows for speeds to pick up. And so there was that concern. So by narrowing it slightly, we're able to accommodate some traffic calming, but also in general, less bituminous pavement versus green space is always a desirable thing. And there's been discussions about whether you can do a bit more greening of Elm Street with no additional parking on the north side. So that's kind of the design. The working group meets on Thursday of this week. I think the time is what, 3 to 4:30, Lauren?
Yes, 3 to 4:30 on this Thursday.
But more importantly for this working group is where they're actually going before the select board on Tuesday, February 1st. And that is really kind of a critical update meeting where hopefully with the redesign work that the working group has done to try and address some of the abutters' concerns and bring more of the community on side, plus starting to do some of the preliminary costing work bottoms up to bring the price tag down from $1,600 per linear foot to something lower than that. We'll be moving back in the right direction. But I guess my ask of the working group would be as many members as possible show up to that February 1st select board meeting agenda item and really just, it's hard to participate via Zoom, but the best way I can suggest that we effectuate that is to type your name, your address, and the fact that you're there in support of the Elm Street Working Group and the designs being put forward by the working group. And if you type that into the chat, it generally becomes part of the record. It's hard sometimes to get recognized. Lauren, is there anything else that Tim and I missed or we should be doing in terms of support? I mean, we certainly could take it as far as having the master plan implementation committee write a letter in support of the working group if you think that that's going to be helpful.
So I think that's a great recommendation. I will just add that there's an agenda setting session tomorrow for the select board. I believe we are now scheduled for the meeting on the 15th. And the reason for that meeting is that gives us the time that we need to actually get the data figures around the pricing down pat. When we were sort of going from our last meeting last week, there's been a lot of ideas thrown out. And we really want to make sure that we're getting the consensus of what the community wants before Jason spends an inordinate amount of time trying to price it out. So that's why we're having this meeting on Thursday with the group. And we've invited members of the community that have been participating in the most recent iterations. So, everybody and anybody is of course welcome to join on Thursday. And then I do believe, like I said, that we are being rescheduled from February 1st to the 15th, but we'll keep this group up to speed as to whenever we get scheduled, because I will just reiterate that it really is important to hear for the select board to hear the larger, voices of the community, because it is so easy, particularly in these Zoom meetings, for the conversation to sort of get railroaded when there's one naysayer in the room. So that it would definitely be helpful any way that you can support the initiative to make that known to the decision makers.
Thanks, Lauren.
Do you
I
think
can
it would be
assure you that the Mike Sardina and I and any of the others are going to spend the next couple of weeks meeting with the neighbors. I have a list of the neighbors. I'm going to be meeting with them either in person or by phone. And the thing is that there are a lot of things neighbors are concerned about. And all of the things they're concerned about that I've heard so far can be dealt with with tweaks here and there. There's nothing about this particular plan so far that I've heard that would say this doesn't make sense. So at least from the neighbor's standpoint. So I'll keep pushing on it, and I'll have hopefully more to report on the Thursday meeting. And then when we get to the select board, hopefully we'll have a consensus from the neighborhood.
Thanks, Tim.
Tim, are you gonna try and organize a letter of support, even if it's simple as, we're signing on to supporting this design and getting people to sign that? It might be helpful to have it in writing.
Absolutely. I will do that once I touch base with all the neighbors.
You got a lot of wrangling to do
Make
first.
sure that they are, hopefully Ralph isn't doing the same thing on his side. So we have competing letters, but no, I don't think, again, I think Ralph, I understand his concerns. I think he represents a constituency of one at this point. And his lovely wife, Jackie, is very supportive of enhancing the captain's well. So, there may be some conflicts there in the family. So we're going to, make sure we address them both.
Yeah. Lauren, do you think it's helpful for us to pen a short letter of support?
It certainly doesn't help. I mean, hurt. Evening meeting of the night, can you tell?
Exactly. I'm sorry. We definitely had I'm sure a Monday of all Mondays at this point. Or maybe it's just a typical Monday at this point, sadly.
No, but I mean, in all seriousness, I think that would be helpful to have that on the record in terms of getting the support from the select board when it comes down to the time to make a decision.
Okay.
I think by the way, I think from what I can gather, the majority of the select board is supportive of what we're doing here. I think you mentioned Jean. I think she's concerned with, you know, if we do funding for Elm Street, will that take away funding from other things that she's interested in? I think that's her main thing,
Yep.
but she is concerned about resiliency. And so I'm working on that with her to make sure she's engaged in that part of it. I'm not quite sure where Jack is, but I will work with him. I'm working with him on a number of other harbor related things.
Jack, last I heard, and this is just anecdotal, Jack is siding with the party of one right now.
Yeah, I think he and Ralph are probably both representing the same constituency.
Yes.
So,
Um,
so anyway, I think we should not be deterred. Let's push ahead. I'll do the work that I have to do and come to this committee and to the working group and then to the select board and we'll continue on. This is a once in a generation opportunity. I think we need to push forward with it.
Does anybody on the committee have concerns about writing a letter of support? It probably is going to happen in between our now and our next meeting. So we'd have to kind of agree on it tonight and then entrust one individual to draft it. Certainly a draft could be circulated, but there's not going to be really a mechanism to collect substantive input unless we want to have a separate meeting on the letter of support, which I'm happy to do. So Marissa, Jen, Cassie, Amy, concerns about doing a letter of support, or are you conceptually?
I'll bring it up at the planning board meeting on Wednesday.
Marissa?
No concerns.
I have no concerns.
Jen? You're on mute.
I'm gonna say I'm supportive, and I guess I feel like this has come up before, but in general, how do we think about letters in support from master plan? I guess we've talked a lot about the different goals that we're trying to accomplish collectively, and I think this seems to tick all those boxes. So I guess like I feel like we've gone through this once before, and what's the process? I mean, is it a vote? Is it like, I think this one passes muster either way personally, but just kind of curious how we think about this.
So this is what we did for the Sawyer Street sidewalks. And generally what I would recommend we do is keep it pretty factual. We're the master plan. We're the keeper of the master plan implementation and strategy. So I would go through here, and I'd also go through the harbor plan and try and pull out all the citations where it talks about connectivity between the village and the harbor. I think there's some specific references actually to Elm Street. So probably the first step would be, here's what we say in the master plan, the harbor plan. It was identified as a priority, as a strategy and goal. That'd be point number one. I think point number two would be all the work, we charged a working group. The working group spent 15 months.
Yeah.
We hired a consultant.
Yeah.
Here's what we did. And then, oh, by the way, we have a design that has been vetted and is now in the process of being tweaked, but basically saying we support this. And I think the only thing I would say also in addition to that is that we identified this 2 years ago or summer of 2020 as an implementation goal. Like the fact that we're sort of waffling is like, this is exactly the wrong time to waffle.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm
yeah.
supportive. I think that
Yeah.
you're getting at exactly my question, which is
Okay.
when we kind of go around the room and say, does anyone have any concerns? I think the idea is that we're showing how this supports the work that we've been doing and how we have no concerns from the standpoint of sort of satisfying all of the objectives that we're pursuing as a master plan implementation committee, and that seems right to me. So
Yeah, I think it would be, here's where it is in the master plan and the harbor plan. We identified it as an implementation priority, 2 years ago. We had a working group on it for 15 months. And, yes, let's move ahead to phase. I think the final recommendation is we need to move ahead into phase 2 design work in order to unlock future grant dollars for actual construction and engineering. Yeah, but again, this isn't going far out on a limb. This is basically restating the facts as to why we chose this as a priority, and we're halfway through implementation and we have to kind of finish it up, folks.
Sounds good to me.
What we did last time was we just took a quick vote that everybody was in agreement of writing a letter of support, and then we drafted it and we sent it off, and that's it just sort of goes on the record and can be incorporated into the packet for the select board when they meet on the 15th. So I make a recommendation that we write a letter of support of the work done by the Elm Street Corridor Working Group and for the continued implementation during phase 2 design. All in favor of a letter of support? I, Katie Dugan.
Hi, Tim Davis.
Hi, Cassie Maltesta.
I am Marissa Manley.
Hi, Amy Glassmeyer.
All right. That's great. And again, you know, Amy, if you can bring this up at planning, that would be fantastic. Again, I think, I mean, from a planning board perspective, you know, this is an example of like the CHI, you know, project is going to change that section of the corridor, and the Elm Street Working Group was trying to work with that, plus the objectives of the community in order to make all of this achieve that connectivity and that view corridor that we've been talking about since the beginning. So that would be great.
In addition, Katie, I will ask the Harbor Committee to draft a similar letter. And I will also work with the residents, the neighbors, and put together a letter for them, assuming I could get a quorum of the residents. I'll be working with them for the next week or so, and hopefully come up with a letter that they will all agree to as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm happy to draft that letter of support, and I'll circulate a draft. But if somebody has any major objections, we certainly can call a meeting to discuss. But absent that, I will get that in prior to the meeting on the 15th. And Lauren, you'll keep us in the loop there.
Great. Go for it, Katie. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So next up is climate resiliency. Really the update here is sort of twofold. One is that the first of the climate resiliency forums that Tim has talked about, that Harbor and CHIP along with CMI, CSCR, and others, is happening tomorrow night. And so I am actually going to try and Zoom in and listen. It sounds, super, super interesting. So these are the details. It's tomorrow night via Zoom. It's at 7:00, and I had circulated to everybody an invite that CMI did up, which actually had the live link in it to the Zoom meeting. And there were 3 parts to the actual meeting. There was Mark Borelli from the Providence Center for Coastal Studies, who's going to be talking about Cohasset Situate research that was done on storm tide pathways. Tom Bell, who is a member of the Conservation Commission and also husband of Amy, is going to present some highlights that he's done in terms of the impact of a hurricane or a large nor'easter in terms of storm surge and other impacts to critical infrastructure assets around the harbor. And then Jack Buckley from CSCR is going to also present some data from the recent king tide and talk further about vulnerabilities from stormwater runoff. So it sounds like it's going to be a really great setup. And Tim, this is the first of what, 2 or 3 more that are going to be coming?
Well, there will be several of them. I don't know how many will actually end up. What we're trying to do is to kick this conversation off with the greater Cohasset community and actually Situate as well. Cohasset is going to have a climate summit in, around Earth Day coming up in the spring. So what the Harbor Committee wanted to do is to get the conversation started and get people aware of, acclimated to, interested in, supportive of all of this effort. And I think what you'll see tomorrow is really well put together, very specific, very definitive. Different experts are going to be testifying, if you will, if you use that term. But they will be addressing it, and there's been a lot of back and forth and iteration to what you will see tomorrow night. But I think what it'll do, if nothing else, is stimulate the interest and concern of the citizens of the community that we really need to address this. We are vulnerable. We need to address it. We need to engage our neighbors to the south, Situate, because a lot of, if there's a storm surge coming in, a lot of it's going to be coming from Situate. Now, Situate at the moment probably doesn't care what happens, but we want to make sure we do whatever we do to make them aware that we do care. And so we got to address that. So anyway, that's the first of several, and we're going to see what happens, see what kind of engagement we get from the public tomorrow night. And then we'll move on to the next one after that.
Okay. Laura, and I hate to ask this question, given that you are down to a staff of one in the planning department currently. Hopefully resumes are rolling in, and I say that in all seriousness. Brianna had met with Marissa and myself in December, and we had updated the working group in December about that Cohasset Climate Summit on Earth Day in April. And we had kind of kicked around, 5 topics: energy resiliency, harbor resiliency, waste reduction, water conservation, land conservation, and then regional opportunities or models of municipal climate adaptation as kind of a 5th topic. What we had talked about last time was having the master plan implementation committee kind of being the grand sponsor of this and helping organize, but then signing up AEC or Harbor or the Water Commission or Concom or Open Space to have slots to kind of further educate the community, begin to flush out what the critical climate issues were that facing Cohasset, identify next steps. But that's kind of where we left it. Is the plan still to do that in April? I guess the reason I'm asking is that if it is, we should probably start reaching out to some of those other committees now to get it on their radar screen so that they can begin to help prepare sections of that climate summit.
Yeah, so the plan right now is still April, but I have to check in with Brianna. Brianna has been supporting us on a very, very small part-time basis to help aid with some of these items. And we're hoping to get this assistant town planner position seated as soon as possible. The goal will be that they will add some capacity when they are seated to this topic and this sort of initiative. With that said, I don't really have a substantial update at this time, just because I've really been in, all the boiling pots mode. Yeah. But let me, I'm speaking with Brianna tomorrow, and I'm going to talk to her about her bandwidth capacity to keep us going in the interim. And I will plan to circle back with you, Katie, on this this week so that we can get a more concrete idea of what we're looking at for timeline and capacity.
Okay, no, that would be great. Because I think on our end, what we had talked about was, at least as a first step to kind of get organized, is trying to type up a 1-pager that kind of summarized the format of this April 22nd summit, what the topics were going to be and what we were looking for the committees to input in on, because the idea would be, at least when we kicked it around with Brianna in December, was that 5 topics, 5 or 6 committees would each take a topic and bring something to the table. But we haven't either typed that up and we actually haven't invited the other committees to go or given them their homework assignment. So we kind of need to kick that off sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear what you're saying. That makes sense.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind touching base with Brianna and finding out her capacity, we can kind of go from there. I guess this is one area where I would love to have 1 or 2 people from the Master Plan Implementation Committee kind of take the lead in helping organize this. So I don't know if there's anybody that's on the committee that might be willing to sort of help move this agenda item forward. The time frame for it would really be getting the ball rolling in February, but then kind of March and April would be really the time frame where work product would need to get generated, and we'd also need to be on top of other committees to make sure that they were doing their work product.
Hey, Katie, I mean, I'm definitely still interested in helping with this one.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, if there's anything I can do, or if we just want to wait to hear back from Brianna, yeah, just let me know. I'm definitely still very interested. Also looking forward to the forum tomorrow night too.
Okay, good. Well, that's great, Marissa. If is anybody else, I mean, there's other areas that we need help on, so don't feel like you have to jump at this opportunity. Tim, you've already got, I think it in some ways, Tim's already got his committee off and working, so it'd be more wrangling some of the other committees and letting Harbor continue and Chip continue to do the good work that they're doing. It's
I think probably that's how I can help the most, is just kind of keeping that on track.
yeah. Okay, well, for now, Marissa, I'll put your name against that one and we'll figure out how to kind of staff it from a master plan. And Lauren, you'll get back to us based on what Brianna's availability is.
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's it in terms of climate resiliency. Next up on deck is affordable housing. And this is one where I sort of lost the talk track, except where we left it off, the census was still bouncing around in draft form. There were 40 housing units that were in production or could be in production. So we had the opportunity to hit our safe harbor target, but that's kind of the last I remember. So Jen, I was hoping that you might give us an update on affordable housing.
So we're in one of these moments that seems to keep happening where our affordable housing meeting is tomorrow afternoon. So I was wondering, Lauren, if you have any further updates beyond. I think the 2 that I wanted to ask about were I guess, whether the moving forward of the harbor development gives us any more timing clarity on those units. And then CJC, which I think is sort of the unending topic, whether there's any update, because I heard through looking at some other meeting minutes that we might be moving toward getting the occupancy on some of the units on the residential side on that one. And then because there are also rumors of new developments in town, wondering if there are any updates on discussion. So Lauren, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and if there are no updates on any of this.
That's quite all right. I have a couple of things to share. I'll just, in terms of, first I'll just address the census piece, that we got confirmation that we are anticipating at least the second half, or the spring into second half of 2022, that we'll get the numbers to update the SHI count. So right now we're going to continue to utilize the existing numbers that we have. So we have a couple more months at least of using these figures. For 390 Chief Justice Cushing Highway, they did get site plan site plan modification approval from the planning board, there is a list of conditions that go along with that, but they are one step closer towards their certificates of occupancy. And last I spoke with the building inspector about this, they were exploring the feasibility of issuing a partial certificate of occupancy, and in which case the building inspector would intend to have the actual units that are deed restricted affordable to come on in the first sort of phasing of the residential units. So I do owe the Affordable Housing Trust a more substantial update on that, and I will share it with this group and the steering committee as well. But we are moving in the right direction on that project. Let me think. The other project you asked about was the Cohasset Harbor Inn development units. So those offsite units, they have moved forward with their application to DHCD, and right now they're sort of I don't know whether they're exactly ready to move forward or if they were in a holding pattern to get their state licensing done. But we did hear from the state today. We got another letter. I didn't have a chance to take a look at it, but it's progressing, so we can anticipate those continuing to make progress. And then I'll just note that 808 Jerusalem Road, which is the Habitat for Humanity project over at the corner of where Hingham and Cohasset meet, there was a site visit that took place where a representative DHCD came and met with John Hallen and someone from Habitat for Humanity to tour the site and take a look at things. So they're in receipt of the application. And then as soon as DHCD makes a determination that that site and the project is eligible for the program they've applied for, they will be submitting for the comprehensive permit through our zoning board of appeals. So sort of anticipating within the next month that they may be able to file for their local permitting piece. So things are moving ahead. And then one last update on the affordable housing front that I just wanted to bring to your attention is that the Affordable Housing Trust has put forward a notice of intent for the annual town meeting article that would ask town meeting to move 2 pieces of town-owned property into ownership for the Affordable Housing Trust for potential affordable housing development. They are small lots. I would imagine, that each one could probably only sustain 1 house lot. But with that said, one of the goals is to try to think about different ways they could do this, and maybe getting these one-offs is just sort of one of the ways that they could try to solve that. So that is in works right now. The trust will be moving forward with trying to get this on the town meeting warrant process, and they're actually going to the select board on Tuesday the 1st to give an update about this process. So more to unfold on that, but when this does come to fruition, if this group would entertain support for that, that would be helpful, in getting the word out for that town meeting action.
Okay. And those are those town-owned parcels that are due to like back taxes that were ultimately fell into town ownership, or it doesn't really matter, but I'm just kind of curious how those 2 particular parcels got targeted as ones that could be converted.
Yeah, so I do believe that they were both a result of tax taking. I know one at least was, the other one I'll double check it. But what happened essentially was the Affordable Housing Steering Committee identified a handful of parcels, and I went over the information that we had with them to sort of narrow down which ones might be actual viable buildable options. They narrowed it then down to 4, and then the trust took those 4 under advisement and are moving forward with requesting 2, with thought that, let's just get our foot in the door and see how it goes with these 2 parcels as a test subject before we move forward with additional parcels. So I will be putting together information for the select board packet for the first, and I will send it to this group as well so that everyone's up to speed on what's going on.
And the only other one that I can think of is 1 Pleasant Street, because didn't that finish up and get its site plan review done by the planning board? Are they in other permitting phases right now?
So that's a good question with that project. I'm not entirely sure where the status of that project is, because they have received their approval from the planning board, but then I did hear that the site was up for sale. So I don't know what the future of that site is. There's a potential for someone to purchase and develop as permitted, but right now there's been no building permit applications, and there is also the potential that whoever the new applicant is either chooses not to develop or just chooses an alternate path, in which case they would need to come back to the planning board for a different site plan review process, depending on what they decide to move forward with.
Gotcha. I didn't realize it was up for sale. So the developer got it through site plan review, has the quote unquote permit, but then is kind of marketing that package as an opportunity.
Right.
Okay. And that had, correct me if I'm wrong, like 10 or 12 units in it, right? Because it hit that 25% threshold.
It was 14 units and they were volunteering to do 25% affordable as a rental option so that we would get a count for 14 units.
Yeah, okay. But it sounds like if it's for sale, there's no guarantees that a new developer, they'd obviously have to come back to the planning board because it would be a revision.
Right.
But as approved, it was a good opportunity for the town. Okay. So I guess, Jen, if you can send a note, if there's anything new that you hear, and we heard about CHI 380, 390, One Pleasant, 808, and the trust. If there's anything else that comes out, let us know.
Will do.
Okay, that's great. Okay. I think the most exciting is the 380, 390, where if there's going to be a partial certificate of occupancy and we get some of the affordable housing online first. I mean, again, as Amy knows, the punch list is quite long in terms of like what they have to still complete, but at least there's agreed upon punch list, which is like
Every time they look at it, something else is found.
Yeah.
It's like they kind of pile dirt over it just in case you don't look, and then they got to work on it. So
yeah.
it's kind of a comedy of errors.
Lauren or Amy, does the partial certificate of occupancy, is that just for the ground floor? Or does that include partial upstairs?
So it's all upstairs is the residence.
Yeah,
Right.
but the partial occupancy is inclusive of the upstairs?
That was the discussion. It hasn't
Yeah.
been, they haven't issued anything yet, but there's discussions as to how they might
Yeah, phase
this.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the goal is to try and get the upstairs permitted because that's where the affordable
Well, that's-
housing.
Usually you'd think it would be, phase one would be the ground floor. That's why I asked. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
no, I think we're doing everything backwards as usual. We're working from the top down. Okay, well, that's great. The good news is that our denominator hasn't been updated yet, so we're still operating on the old census numbers. We have a little bit more time. Next up was comprehensive zoning redraft and reorganization. Cassie and I and the zoning bylaw working group, we were successful in getting funding at special town meeting for a consultant who will help us with the comprehensive redraft. Cassie and I worked with Lauren and Michelle Leary in procurement to get a request for qualifications drafted, and that went out for bid on January 10th. We're now in that waiting period where we wait and see. The bid actually closes on February 10th, and we'll know hopefully how many, not just if we get anybody to bid. We had a pre-proposal meeting where consultants could come and ask questions. Only one bidder showed up at that meeting last week. So it's hard to gauge, but we have heard from Michelle that a lot of the consulting firms are busy now. It's sort of like the global labor force constraints apply both at Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks as much as they do at high-end consulting firms. And so Michelle had heard back from one of the 15 firms that we had directly targeted as part of the RFQ that they just didn't have the bandwidth and capacity. So we're trying to work with Michelle to figure out what, if any, options we have where we could shake the tree a little bit more. I think Cassie and I are both nervous that we're not going to get either the consultant with the qualifications we're looking for, or we just get like one or two to choose from. It'd be lovely if we had multiple bids that we were evaluating, because the scope of services that we're looking for is pretty wide ranging, to be honest, and a lot of it has to do with public engagement, consensus building, and communication, which is, the piece that we know that we need to work on in order to get the buy-in from the community. to do the zoning work. So more to come on that. It's hard to tell where we stand, but it's not off to like, it's not on fire. Let's put it that way. Maybe it's just a slow burn. We'll have some good surprises, but I think Cassie and I are concerned enough that we're going to try and meet with Michelle later this week and see if there's anything we can do to kind of solicit more interest.
I was just going to add, the good thing is that the one firm that did join the pre-meeting is local and has worked with the town of Cohasset. So they do have experience. But alluding to what Katie was saying was that it would be nice to have at least 2 or 3 so that we kind of benchmark how they responded to our RFQ and kind of detailed their scope of services so we can kind of compare apples to apples. So I think that I agree with Katie where I would like to see if more than just one, so that we have the chance to kind of reflect and see how everyone responded and their vision kind of moving forward to help us out. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yeah.
Sounds like my granddaughter is visiting somebody.
Yeah.
My son hasn't gone to bed
Your
yet.
son.
Exactly.
It's wonderful. Good for you.
Yeah, more
Good to
like,
get him involved in civic engagement early.
oh my God. Those are the
Family
days-
oriented board here. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Those are the days when I had like a bag of M&Ms that I would just dole out for like peace and quiet. And I'd look down and be like, oh my God, I just fed my daughter like, a quarter of a bag. Like there's going to be hell to pay.
You're a really nice mom, boy.
I was, well,
Katie, I was gonna ask, did you get caught in crossfire at Starbucks? Is that how you knew about it? I
What?
did. Did you get caught in the Starbucks line last week when they closed? The inside was closed?
No, I actually had a worse experience. So well, maybe not worse, but I got up, my daughter was Friday. She was like Thursday night. She was really dragging. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get up early. I'm going to get her like a special Impossible breakfast sandwich and I'll get myself a latte. I'll get her favorite chai latte, drive over there at 5:30. They're not open. And I was like, what? I'm like, okay. So I went to Dunkin's, went to Plan
That's what
B.
I did inside the Cumberland Farms.
Exactly. And then I went back later in the afternoon and I was like, okay, I'm going to get my latte now. And it was like 11:15. They didn't open till noon. Like on last Friday, they were open from like noon to 6.
Is that because they don't have enough workers?
Yeah, they're literally, I think they're switching, as far as I can tell, like if they're short on workers, they give half a day to Hingham and they give half a day to Cohasset. You just never know which half of the day you're going to get. So,
It was quite a scene inside the Dunkin' Donuts. I think they got word that people were gonna, because the line was out, it was through the CVS parking lot. And so the staff was getting all excited and knowing that people were about to come into Dunkin' Donuts instead of the Starbucks. And it was a scene to be seen.
all right, it is definitely time to be out in the labor force looking for employment.
It is.
Tim, are you ready to go back?
Well,
Jump
I'm going to
back in.
open up a little coffee shop at the end of my driveway.
Yeah, exactly.
I get up at 5 o'clock and my coffee is going soon, right shortly thereafter. So I could probably get everybody coming along Atlantic Avenue.
You could totally clean up. Absolutely. Next time.
Lemonade stands are not just for kids anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Come in and visit if you want coffee. Anytime after 5 o'clock in the morning, it's ready.
Awesome. All right. So next up on the updates was regional sewer. So this is another tale of like some good steps forward, and then unfortunately some steps backwards. So the good news is that there have been discussions that have happened, and I would say this is sort of September to December, between the town of Cohasset and the town of Situate. And when I mean the town of Cohasset, specifically the town manager, one representative from the select board, and one representative from the sewer commission. And So that was the good news. The bad news is that we still continue to hit stumbling blocks internally with our select board and sewer commission in terms of building a majority or a consensus view around whether regional sewer is the right next step for us. And if you guys, many of you know this sad tale, but the regional study was done in 2018-19. I think they published their report in June of 2019 with a set of preliminary recommendations for Hull, Cohasset, and Scituate. They then went back and developed a fifth scenario in the fall of 2019 that, or actually in March of or February of 2020 that had the support of Hull and Cohasset. And when that had the support of Hull and Scituate, and when Cohasset was asked to support that fifth alternative, we balked, and then COVID happened. And so when we picked up a story as the Master Plan Implementation Committee, one of our initial recommendations, and it still remains initial recommendation, is that we finish the conversation as to whether we want to participate in regional sewer, and frankly, how we want to do sewer planning for the town of Cohasset. And so following that recommendation, that initial implementation recommendation in the summer of 2020, the select board and the sewer commission and master plan implementation had a series of joint meetings. There was a consultant that was brought in to kind of help with the decision matrix. That decision matrix was published in early 2021. And then it was the job of the select board, one representative select board and one representative from the sewer commission to go off and begin to explore regional sewer with some caveats with Scituate, which they did, and they brought back 6 months later. So what the recommendations, and so this presentation I circulated in the packet. This is what Corey Evans gave us as an update from January of this year. Sort of the highlights, we all know the harbor is in crisis, high bacteria counts. In fact, this summer with all the rains, it was pretty shocking what was happening from a runoff perspective in the harbor. Let's see. These are just some other facts, many of which you guys know. The current intermunicipal agreement which helps Cohasset both from a redundancy perspective, but also gives us the capacity we need currently to run our operations to support all of the Seward residents in Little Harbor. The Central District in North Cohasset, where I live, expires in 2026. And when comes to intermunicipal agreements, like 4 years is not that far away in terms of negotiating a new agreement. Our current sewer treatment plant has capacity limitations. We are, with the addition of 380, 390 CJC, perhaps the Cook Estates and some other development in town, we will be approaching 80% capacity in the near future, which is kind of the trigger at which the state requests that you do a capacity or sewer planning. Because once you hit 80% capacity, it's assumed that you're going to need to do some kind of expansion or do some kind of management in order to make sure that you don't exceed limits. And then we all know that Scituate was looking to partner in particular with Cohasset, but also with Hull, since Hull has excess capacity at their plant. They want to sewer North Cohasset to clean up failing septic systems that ring the Gulf River, but they also want to help with the economic revitalization of North Scituate. So that's kind of the current situation. Discussions were held, it says mid-2020, but that's actually mid-2021. That's a typo. And then identified priority areas the plan, there were sort of four scenarios, there were five scenarios, four of which were laid out in the original plan. There was a fifth scenario that was laid out as an addendum to the regional sewer planning that took place in 18, 19, and 20. The fifth scenario basically was a scaled down version of sewering South Main in Cohasset and then sewering selected areas of North Situate. The current priority areas that have been discussed most recently are Border Street, Gannett, and North Situate, but not North Situate all the way over to Minot Light, but rather sort of concentrating in where there's the economic development portion and sort of the Situate side of the Gulf River. They started to do some more specific flow calculations based on that scaled down scenario 5. There was work looking at the infrastructure, in particular, how much capacity, incremental capacity could be garnered from our plant with additional optimization of our existing infrastructure. And then they were talking about a framework for cooperation, which is really code for an intermunicipal agreement. So this was the vision that they were talking about for the framework, which is connecting priority areas, Cohasset's priority areas to our sewer system along South Main. If we connect South Main in Cohasset plus connecting in some sections of Hull, we would have to, in order to stay under that 80% capacity limit, reduce some of the flow to our treatment plant by diverting some of our North Cohasset flow to Hull. So we could accept all of the Situate load in our plant operations. And then obviously through all of this, since our IMA is expiring in 2026, we'd need to negotiate a new IMA with Hull that also envisioned Situate as a part of that. So that's kind of where we are in terms of the current framework. I think the best way to describe this is that I think it's been right-sized from some of the bigger vision that was first articulated in the first 4 scenarios, and even right-sized even further from that alternative 5. Where we keep on seeming to stumble is like getting all of the select board on board with this and all of the sewer commissioners on board with it. They had another joint meeting after this January 4th update at the end of January. And we continue to stumble in terms of consensus building. And I haven't had a chance to catch up with Corey after last Tuesday's meeting. To be honest, he was pretty disheartened because he sort of took one step forward and then took one step back. But I think the good news is that there's a framework that's being articulated. The bad news is, how do we finally get consensus built? How do we finally get the consensus built internally in Cohasset to move forward with this? I'm a bit stymied at this point as to how we do that, but I think really just actively listening to all parties is probably the best thing that we can do in the short term. And hope that that we get there. The framework seems to be focusing on cleaning up the harbor, which I think is going to have a lot of community support, but it's just there's not been a lot of public visibility on this. And it's not a particularly sexy topic, except when people start pounding the table of like, I don't want my kids swimming in shit anymore, which was a quote from the January 4th meeting. So if people have questions or thoughts, I'm honestly, I don't know if I'm frustrated or I'm just sort of resigned at this point, but it's definitely another example of something that we identified as a priority that seems to like, finally making some forward progress, but it keeps on doing a crazy Ivan.
Well, I'll add a couple of things to it. First of all, I really, finally, we've got the select board at least engaged, and Corey's a good one to get engaged. I hope he doesn't get too discouraged. Bill McGowan, representing the Sewer Commission, I think is amenable to coming to some kind of an agreement. Keep in mind that the Cohasset Sewer Commission represents not the town, but those of the town that are connected to the current sewer system. So they really have no jurisdiction or authority to expansion of the sewer system. But obviously they're an integral part of it. But I think Bill is amenable to working out something that makes sense. I think from the harbor standpoint, I think we have to be a little careful about what is polluting the harbor. The primary pollution source for the harbor is runoff. It's not from the failed sewer systems in North Scituate, although they contribute without any question. But I think we've got to be holistic about how we approach cleaning up the Gulf River and the harbor. Clearly, having North Scituate on a sewer system would help, but then there's more work to do after that. Further complicated. Yeah, do you want to interject, Katie?
No, I just had a question on the runoff comment. So that's specifically stormwater runoff of nitrates from people's lawns versus nitrates from septic systems?
Well, it's primarily runoff from the lawns, I think. I mean,
Yeah,
that's my understanding. I don't, Jack Buckley at CSCR could comment more specifically about this, I'm sure, because they've done a lot of study up there. But I think there's more to it than simply the sewer system.
Yep.
It's going to take an agreement between Scituate, Cohasset, and Hull that I think the United Nations would be hard pressed to develop. We have personalities that are dealing with this that may never be able to come to an agreement in those three groups. But my hope is we will continue to push forward. We will not lose focus on this, and we'll continue to push forward and get it done, because it really makes sense to get it done. Then there are a bunch of ancillary issues that go into it. Working with Scituate and getting a governance agreement with Scituate over those portions of the waters of Cohasset Harbor and the Gulf River that are in Scituate but impact Cohasset is critical. And we're trying to do that. That's another whole initiative, and we're trying to get that governance agreement, because the Harbor Committee is pretty much stymied on a bunch of things that we're trying to do without having jurisdiction over those portions of Cohasset Harbor that are in Scituate. So it's not a trivial thing. It's certainly complicated, but hopefully everybody will keep their shoulder to the wheel and we will move forward.
Yeah, Lauren, I don't know how closely you've been following this or not. I'm sure, I bet it's not.
Have a substantial update to provide on this matter.
Okay. So right now, I haven't had a chance to connect with Corey, and he's out of town this week for work. So I'll pose the question to Corey when I track him down next week, because he and I agreed to connect next week. Pose the question as to how master plan implementation can be helpful. I think we pushed hard up front to kind of get the select board and the sewer commission meeting jointly. And it's funny, they actually, I guess we have had some success, because on their own accord, they actually agreed to meet in a joint meeting without us pushing. So maybe that's progress right there. I do think that having Corey engaged is a really good thing. I actually think that the select board probably is a 4-1 vote in favor of doing something. I think Jack Creighton is the sole holdout. He seems to still think that we should go it alone, as it relates to sewer plant management. I do think that Bill McGowan is generally supportive, and he certainly is passionate about cleaning up the harbor. So I'll pose the question to Corey as to how we can be helpful. But if anybody has any idea on how to move this forward, I'm open to it.
Well, I would just say one thing about Jack. I've talked to him ad nauseum about this issue. His concern is he doesn't want Cohasset to be stuck with a contract with Situate that would be detrimental to the town and the citizens of Cohasset. That's his concern. So, I mean, that's everybody's concern. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. And I've told him, I agree with you, Jack. We're not going to do anything that's going to get us into trouble with a contract with either Situate or Hull that leaves Cohasset squeezed in the middle of, and I won't do the analogy, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so that I think Jack can be brought along. I think it's going to take some work and some perseverance and some patience and some deep breathing, but I think we can get there.
Yeah. I guess my general observation is that of the 5 priorities that we implemented, we're still having to put a lot of energy and effort to kind of get to that 80 or 90% complete mark. I mean, I think zoning is taking up quite a bit of time. Elm Street is still taking up quite a bit of time, regional sewer. So it's interesting to me how long it is taking in terms of sustained effort to get these to a substantially complete. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it is sort of the 2 years in on master plan implementation. That would be my observation, is that it's sustained effort is the only way that we're going to get any of this to over the. The next update was really just
Katie, don't be discouraged. Sausage making is a messy thing. And that's what we're doing here. So don't be discouraged. We will persevere.
No,
And I was just going to ask quickly if has Jack Buckley or anyone put together like an analysis that says like when is it too late? I mean, maybe Basking Beach being closed off for the summer is that point of being too late, but has anyone done anything like that to just apply pressure?
No, it's an interesting question. No, I mean that I bet Jack has some data.
Well, the interesting thing is, where did the pollution come from that caused Basking Beach to be closed down? And I'm not sure there's anything specific that will tell us where that pollution came from, but it really did not come out of the Cohasset sewer system. It clearly did come down through the Gulf River. So I think,
and then unprecedented rainfall, right? I thought it was a combination.
well, it's stormwater rain, runoff without any question.
And just rain, right? Or no?
Rain, yeah, it's rain,
Yeah.
water. Well, but rain, freshwater rain dropping in the ocean is not going to pollute it, but the runoff from the land is going to pollute it. But freshwater itself is not a polluting agent.
That is just more like ins and outs, like it rained too much for what the harbor could contain as far as outflow, or so it just sat there.
Well, it runs off from the lawns and the highways and everything else. All this runoff comes into the harbor in various sources. The other big thing and that we're working on is making sure that Basking Beach and all of Cohasset Harbor is conserved and preserved, so it doesn't, and conservation is a big thing. Keeping it free from pollutants, including oyster cages, is one of the things that is a priority that I have. And so far we've been successful in doing that. We're going to continue to do that and try to keep that clean. But there's a lot of work to be done, and it comes from a lot of different sources. So the only message I would have is don't be discouraged. We're going to keep at it. There are a lot of people that are interested in this, and we'll keep pushing.
Cassie, I like the idea of doing a summer of 2021 case study, because it was pretty much the most cataclysmic. I mean, it was the high level of rainfall. It was hot as summers go. And we had an incident where Bassings Beach was closed for basically, it wasn't just a week or a couple days. It was like 6 weeks at the end of the summer.
Yeah.
I think that's about as memorable as we're going to have, or maybe it's just hopefully. Do you know Jack Buckley well, or not?
Me?
Yeah.
I mean, I interned at, or not interned, I did my community service at CSCR with Jack, who's one of my teachers. So that was 20 years ago, but I'm sure you remember me.
Do you have the time to reach out to him to see
Sure.
if he has this, just kind of probe at this idea of a case study around the summer of 2021 in terms of harbor health? And again, I don't need the answer to be septic systems, but it's obviously a piece of the puzzle. And, you know, the more that we can do to eliminate pieces of the problem, the better. I mean, we're not going to stop people from fertilizing their lawn. So we've got to fix other things.
Well, you say that, Katie. First of all, I think that's a good idea. Jack's got that data, and he would be delighted to share it. Getting people to move from phosphate fertilizer to something that is more friendly for the environment is not a heavy lift. I mean, we do it here. We've got, 4 acres of green space that we are very careful not to pollute with fertilizer that is going to harm the environment. So it's certainly possible, and I think it's just education, getting people aware of what the issues are.
I agree, Tim. I think it's informing. Yeah, I think that would be helpful with Jack's information.
Jack will do that. And also there is a Gulf River Association. They are very attuned to this, and they will get involved with it.
Yep.
So there are people that will do that. So,
Okay.
And let me know if you need help with Jack. I'm happy to do it. By the way, Tom Sullivan, that owns Mill River Marina and now Atlantica, has contributed a scholarship to CSCR for their students to do this kind of research. So, there are ways to do that. If you need any assistance with that, let me know. I'm happy to help.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to do it, but Tim, if you think it'd be more efficient and effective, if you already have those relationships, if you want to do that.
I think he's heard enough from me. He'd love to hear from you.
Okay, sure.
I think it's just an initial inquiry, Cassie, in terms of like the concept.
Yep.
And I'll also talk to Corey about how we can be helpful, because I think part of it is like nobody's going to ever pay attention to the sewer capacity conversations. Like that's just not what the community's ever going to engage in. But if there's
But they might, Katie, if it impacts when they cannot use Bassings Beach.
Yeah, I think if we position this around harbor health and all the components of harbor health, of which if sewer is a piece of it, but there's other things the community needs to know about harbor health, it could be a hook in, and that's sort of what.
Especially with revitalization and reactivation of the harbor front. It's definitely relevant.
Yeah, I think there's so that's a great segue into the final topic, which I just wanted to. I think everybody's probably seen this if you've been on 143 or you've sort of been about town, but there is another set of plans that are being circulated by the owner of Atlantica and the Cohasset the Cohasset Lobster Pound for redevelopment of these two properties. And again, they're conceptual at this point. They have not begun any of the permitting conversations or gone before the planning board or the ZBA or Concom, but I think they're sort of taking the same approach that the CHI partners did of kind of beginning they're beginning in the court of public opinion before they head the permitting discussion route, but there's two properties, 44 Border and 84 Border. 44 Border is just Atlantica. Actually, this parcel right here is the old Salt House, which is a separate parcel and will remain in ownership with CHI. But there's the redevelopment of 44 Border Atlantica, and then the redevelopment of 84 Border Street, which is the Lobster Pound. So what's happening at 44 Border, at least what is being proposed conceptually, is renovating the existing restaurant, adding a deck area. I'll show there's some reconfiguration of the interior space for it looks like retail and some additional takeout, food. And then the biggest changes are here down at 84 in terms of uses, which is renovating the existing river building into an inn and boathouse. And then the plan also extends over to Government Island, where the developer is, I assume, contributing as a community betterment, the renovation of the exterior of the Harbor Master building, which we all know is in a not particularly functional state for boaters. It may provide office space for our Harbor Master, but it doesn't really provide any of the amenities that a typical Harbor Master building does in other towns in terms of a place for boaters to come in and use facilities, et cetera, et cetera. So the plan for the Atlantica property, I think yellow is retail space. The dark purple is restaurant space. This is the kind of Atlantica restaurant. And then there appears to be two smaller restaurant takeout spaces. There is in this plan, looks like some public restrooms and amenities here. Does this dock actually exist?
Well, there is a dock out there that may be somewhat reconfigured, but there is.
Okay. And looks like there's outside deck that's being contemplated here. The light purple is all existing Salt House operations, which, as I said, are sort of a separate parcel. This is what the kind of mock-up of the potential building space could look like. Much more kind of open atrium, open deck. So that's all that's out there that's public. But I just did want to make people aware, if you hadn't seen that or heard that, that is afoot. So we've got CHI, which has begun their demo, and they're likely going to be starting building in the next 12 months. I would think we would start to see structures going up in the summer or fall. Is that right, Lauren?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. So we're going to start to see something other than just bulldozing in the next 6 months on CHI. And there's a community conversation that's begun, at least by the developer, as it relates to the Border Street properties. I mean, from my perspective, just looking at the plans, the uses that are being suggested at 84 and 44 Border Street would certainly need some special permits from the ZBA based on our current zoning. The other area that's going to need some consideration from a permitting perspective is clearly around parking. There are parking regulations that require one space for every 100 net square feet of floor area. And the ratio there, I have no idea what the calculations are, and it doesn't look like the applicant has at least made those public yet, but there's clearly some parking regs that would have to be addressed, and that is the purview of the ZBA, and likely would be a variance conversation unless the zoning was modified. And then there's also site plan review and review by the planning board that would take place along with Concom review, obviously a sensitive harbor area, and then and that doesn't even contemplate the Chapter 91 review in that. some of the uses would have to be discussed in terms of whether they're waterfront dependent or not. So that's kind of just more of a news flash than anything else, but I just want to make everybody aware.
I can give you a couple of just additions to the news flash. Today, CHI received their Chapter 91 approval.
Okay.
That
Awesome.
I think that's great. They assumed it was coming. I thought it was a little risky to start demo before they had it, but that they now have. In terms of parking, my understanding is what they're planning at Mill River, they've got sufficient parking for that. And that's kind of why they went with the different configurations of Atlantica, where there is parking, and Mill River, where it's limited parking. But my understanding, they do have sufficient parking to do what they're contemplating. Now, of course, that'll all come to the planning board and ZBA as well, but that's my understanding so far. So they're moving forward slowly. I'm delighted to see they've got Susan Hoadley involved. She's done a great job in various other projects, including the Cohasset Sailing Club. I think that was very well done. So I think we'll find out that there'll be something really quite exciting in that area of the harbor.
Yeah.
Hopefully in my lifetime.
I think that's it in terms of updates. The next meeting in February, I would sort of suggest that we split the agenda between climate summit, April work that we need to get done based on what Lauren tells us after conversations with Brianna. I think we kind of have to assume that's moving ahead. And then continuing to try and move ahead on our sidewalk and funding plan. We had talked about our next step being a meeting with Chief Quigley and Chris Senior to kind of talk about town safety and other town considerations before we move forward any further. So with people's permission, are there any dates to avoid in February when we reach out to try and schedule that?
We're going to be away for school vacation week, which is the 20th to the 26th, 21st, whatever that week is. I don't know if others have that constraint.
Just note that the 21st is President's Day, like Marissa just
Okay.
mentioned.
Oh, well, then that's definitely out. Okay.
Okay, I was just gonna say the date's dedicated to reviewing the responses for the RFQ.
I know, exactly.
I don't know if we'll need that many days, but
I don't know. Yep. So it looks like it's either the week of the 14th or the week of the 28th. Or maybe the week of the 7th. All right, that gives me a good time frame to go out to Tracy and Chief Quigley with some dates. Does anybody have a standing meeting that we want to avoid? I know Wednesday nights are a no-go generally for Lauren and Amy.
The 15th will also be a select board meeting, the 1st and the 15th of February.
Okay. Yep. Okay. All right, that gives me enough. So let me pull Chief Quigley and Chris Senior before we set our February date, and I'll circle back to the group if people are okay with that.
Sounds good.
All right. Marissa, are there any updates from Open Space and Rec that we need to hear about that are important?
No, we didn't have our last meeting because Peter, he didn't show up, and we don't have a vice chair. So
just a thought, have a vice chair.
yeah.
Okay. Tim, you've given us plenty of updates. Cassie and I basically attend all the same meetings together. Jen, you'll keep us posted on affordable housing, and Amy, I know you're just knee deep in subdivisions right now.
Oh, yes.
as the
But I have to say, I so appreciate, you all know this, but our dear Katie is an archaeologist. And she really likes to go into basements and look into deep crevices where a box that's been lost forever has been found.
Yes.
So she's not always doing things on the master plan implementation committee.
Exactly. Every once in a while, I find a undiscovered box from Concom. It only took 2 or 3 months of nagging to get that box unearthed. You just need to know the right people to nag. So,
Katie, I don't think we've had an update from the economic development task force?
yeah,
Yes, I would say that I don't have very much to report because I think that I've been dropped from the list. And
Maybe Larry could join us, or Corey.
yeah, well,
There's a few exciting new businesses coming to downtown, so.
Well, that's that. And there are things that could be done. It's a question really of, there's a difference between doing the kind of planning that you would do for downtown revitalization and the community building that you need to do in order to get people charged about coming to downtown. And I think they're two separate set of skills. If you have one person, you have to have a whole person and 40 hours a week to do it. So I think it's really hard because there are plenty of planning issues down there that will make economic development easier or more difficult. I would say that probably the most, aside from your project, the most recent thing that's taken place is we were approached by a couple organization that wanted to have an outdoor oyster bar behind, sort of, if you were at Lenny's and you look straight down from the top outdoor place where you can drink, and you look straight down and then just look at the 11 hour, there's this area of parking space that belongs to the house or the building that's where the dentist used to be. He's gone, everybody's gone except for the people living in the building. But there's a space and they're planning to put a container that's been modified for outdoor purposes with water and lights and refrigeration and things like that. And it will be located there and be open probably for 6 months of the year. The most likely time people would be wandering around in the nice weather. And then they'll just pack it up and it'll stay there. That's the idea. Whether that last part of the idea actually is the right thing is really unknown. You know, this is like putting something in a place and discovering does it really fit. But they've come before us. They have met all the requirements from the planning board. They will have to get special permits for noise if they want to have music. So there's some things which are not worked out, but they've been pretty diligent at making this go and also coming back and being responsive to the things that we talked about.
that's cool. That's a neat opportunity. And it appears to have been less controversial than our beer garden from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that
Same space, yeah.
Same
the beer
space,
garden, you know, the beer garden was going to be in the basement, and honestly, who wants to go in a basement in the summertime? It's like the only time you want to be in there is when it's cold and your heater's on. So we'll see how this works. I can't imagine that it's an inexpensive experiment. And how it works, I mean, our biggest concern on the planning board was the parking. Parking is going to be, if Red Lion has a wedding and everybody wants to eat downtown, there is no parking anywhere. So it's not like we have surplus space that we want to fill up. It's at these peak moments, it's virtually impossible to park in downtown.
Yeah.
As you know, and as somebody who's building something so that you don't have to worry about that, you're probably gonna be able to make $1 million parking.
We need to unlock the adjacent parcel next to the teen center as part of the revitalization effort and add parking there, in my opinion. I think that's a very underutilized area, and I think it's a great opportunity to add parking for the town.
Yeah, I think that, it's either that or we're gonna have to put up a deck, which I can just imagine who will.
A deck with solar panels. Let's go.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, wasn't that was designed at one point with the MBTA, wasn't it?
The solar panels were
But Tom
definitely
Hamilton said.
floating around there. I haven't heard about the deck. That may be true. So there was some work done this fall by Corey and Lauren and myself around village revitalization. To be honest, like it's sitting, Lauren did a bunch of benchmarking and work with other communities to identify some potential consultants. It's sitting at the bottom of my inbox, so I can put that on a future agenda. I think February we will focus on the climate summit and sort of the sidewalk, and then I will get village revitalization and regional sewer back on kind of a future agenda, so we can kind
Well, in
of.
full transparency, Lauren and I sat with Chris Senior, and it sounded like we weren't ready to move forward with downtown revitalization until understanding the big picture of what was truly coming to town. I think Lauren was the message. And then I think it was kind of dead in the water.
Well, climate change was dead in the water for a while too, and it seems to have risen
Sorry,
to the
my
top.
internet's just unstable, so I
Lauren, are you there or not? Sounds like Lauren.
can you
Go ahead, Lauren.
hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my internet's being it's acting up tonight. Sorry, I just missed a couple of things, but yes, so we were talking about the village. We know it's a goal. It's been sort of identified as the next logical step after the Elm Street project. However, with all of that said, Elm Street project is still very much going on right now, and there's just only so much that we have to give to each of these goals. But I will say that I know that Chris had been speaking with I forget who at the state, but has earmarked like $50,000 to put towards a fund. So we have funds that we could apply for consulting to do some sort of project that's village focused. It's just a matter of diverting the attention to it and doing it in a sequence that's logical based on all of our other projects. But I know that it's a goal that's been identified by multiple groups at this point.
So it was sort of the quote unquote recommendation of the task force to focus on the village revitalization as the next planning initiative. It's just, I would describe it as being trapped behind Elm Street corridor, where we thought we were getting Elm Street corridor into the glide path. We now have had to literally devote November, December, January, and probably February into March to get that into phase 2. So it's just, that's where it's sort of gotten.
Well, it's nice because there's already plans and engineering done for that new parking area. I mean, Lauren, it'd be kind of a good idea to think through updating the MAPC's parking analysis report that seems a little bit outdated now. So potentially maybe some of those funds could be used towards that. I think that report says that the parking lot's only full half the time of the year.
Yeah, no, that 2013 report is long in the tooth for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm not
Somebody
sure.
told me, I think Corey said that there's some planned use for the old Tedeschi's.
Mhm.
So that's a really good sign, because that's just, is an eyesore sitting there.
Yeah, that'll be exciting.
Yeah. I mean, just even getting a couple of those, that particular empty space, gas station, those could be some real game changers in the downtown area for sure. All right, it is now 9:00. And I know that everybody has to get back. Bedtime has happened at the Malatesta house.
I didn't mind missing it tonight. So I'd rather be here with all of you.
Exactly. There are those nights.
Yeah.
All right, so I will come back to the group based on Chris Senior and Chief Quigley's availability with a February meeting date that will avoid school vacation week. And then Lauren, you'll reach back out based on your conversation with Brianna to at least tell us what we should be planning in terms of next steps there.
Yes.
And I'll keep people posted on on regional sewer, Tim, you keep us posted on climate adaptation. Hopefully a bunch of us will be at the meeting tomorrow night to listen and learn. And then I think the only thing that we've agreed in terms of immediate term work product is that letter of support, which I'll try and draft. And we'll have ready for the February 15th meeting of the select board. All right, guys. Without further ado, I'm gonna adjourn our meeting at 8:59.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you
Thank
all.
you, everyone.
Thank
All right,
you.
thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. I know it's a lot of updates, but there's been a lot going on. Some of it good, some of it just the usual.
Join us
Yeah.
tomorrow
everyone.
for the summit. I know Amy will be there.
I'm excited. Like
I'll be there.
this is a topic that I know nothing about, so I'm super excited to listen.
You'll learn a lot.
Yeah,
Okay.
awesome. All right,
Thank you both.
thanks,
Goodbye.
guys.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Adios.
Thank
night.
you.